that you're with us this morning. We are in our third week of this series called Thinking Different. Have you ever been to a point or a place in your life where you start asking questions of, why is this happening? Yeah. Why is this happening? Why is this going on? What did I do? What can I do? So forth, so on. And that's kind of where we're at today with this message called Thinking Different. And it's basically a series that it's about the calling that God has placed on our heart and in our lives. And we're convinced that the gospel causes us to think different when we answer that calling, and to remind you that every person in life, God has a calling on their life. It does not mean you have to be in quote-unquote full-time ministry or anything like that, but everyone has a calling in our life that God's given us and something that he has in store for us, and it causes us to think different about God, about ourselves, about our lifestyle, our job, or whatever, everything about us. And the first week we talked about where just that, every single person that's on the planet is called by God. And we said that the first thing for all of us is that we are called to experience the gospel. We're called to experience his resurrection, his resurrecting power, his grace, his mercy, his love, and so on. And the second thing that we are called is to share the gospel, and we discussed that as well. And then the third thing was to be transformed by the mission of God. And then we are called to participate in that mission. And some people kind of got that confused with meaning that means I have to go on a mission trip. No, that means that your life is a mission trip. Okay? So not only be transformed by the mission, but to participate in the mission as well. And let me say this again. Every single person, even if you're here this morning, you've not connected all the dots about who Jesus is, so forth, so on. Even you have a calling that God has on your life. If that was not the case, you would not be breathing, okay? There's a purpose for you. So as we look at these and we move on, well, and then last week we talked about identifying what our circle of influence is. And that's the people that are around us and the people that we have maybe a little bit of influence over or maybe even authority over. And what we need to do is if we're going to find our calling is to understand who is in this circle and then absolutely work this circle. Gabby, for example, last week received Christ. Her circle are her friends, her fellow employees that she works with, her classmates. That's her circle of influence. And we all have that. So identify that circle and work that circle. And we talked about that. Now, we also spoke about famous people that changed the world. And we talked about that where most people that change the world really they're not famous. You don't see them in history books, a lot of people. And we also talked about how doing something to change the world is really not as glamorous as it seems. And then we looked at how God last week used an ordinary boy to do ordinary things to change the world, which led us to understanding that when we're willing to take the ordinary that we are holding in our hands that we have control of and to turn it over to Jesus Christ, to transfer it over to him and to his hands, a miracle will happen every time. When we're willing to give up, to let go and let God, then a miracle is going to happen every time. And this was one of our things from last week. When you transfer whatever you are holding in your hands into the hands of Jesus, the insufficient becomes sufficient, the insignificant becomes significant, and the ordinary becomes extraordinary. Now, that brings us to today. What I want to talk about today is this. What it means to think different on the obstacles and the challenges that we basically inevitably face when we get serious about changing the world. I think that's another slide there that we did not highlight, so if you can go to the next one, that's the one I added this morning. Thinking different on the obstacles and the challenges that we inevitably face when we get serious about changing the world. In order to answer God's calling, and we're responding to the calling that God has in our lives. Because not only is changing the world not as glamorous as we think, but changing the world is not as easy as we tend to think as well. It's not going to always go the way that you want it to go, and sometimes we're just not prepared for that. Sometimes we get all fired up about changing the world. We get all fired up about making a difference, or maybe we get fired up about making a difference in your workplace, or maybe you own a business and you want to make sure that people know that you're fired up about Christ and He's your Lord. You want people to know that. You want to make a difference. Or in your school, you want people to know in your school or your workplace that you are a follower of Christ. You want to be the hands and the feet of Jesus, and you get fired up about that. And then sometimes something happens and you just kind of lose your passion. You just kind of like, it's kind of like going to a Christian retreat for a weekend. You get all amped up because you have this great speaker. Then you come back home and you're like, oh, I'm back to ground zero again. And we get all fired up about these things, and then something happens and we just kind of lose heart. There used to be a show on TV, and I cannot remember the name of it, but it focused on people that would either they would hire contractors or they would buy a house or whatever, but they would hire contractors and they would do really terrible jobs. And I remember one episode where this family had bought this house from this guy, and basically the seller was supposed to fix the house and it would be move-in ready and so forth. So when they moved in the house, and when they got there, they walked downstairs and they had half of a finished floor in the basement. They had half of a sheetrock basement. It wasn't finished at all. They went upstairs. He was supposed to refinish all the cabinets. He did, half of them. So half of the cabinets were finished, half of them were not finished. And then they went out to the deck. He was supposed to build a deck on the house. He literally built half of the deck was on the back of the house. Then he was supposed to also add a shed for them to put their lawnmower and stuff in. He started to build a shed, and he built 3 walls. And that was it. Nothing was complete. It was just a total, like this stream of unfinished projects. And they asked the seller why it was like that. He said, I get so fired up about something, and I get started on it, and I get involved in it, and I get in the middle of it, and then I think about something else that I want to do worse than this, and I just kind of left this one and went on to this project. And some people's lives are actually that way, that they just have a life that's full of unfinished things. They have great intentions, and they want to be used by God to do things or whatever, and to change the world, and they get all amped up, and then they hit some obstacles, and they start off great, and they have these challenges, and they get discouraged, and they lose their passion, and they just simply walk away from it. And they give up on what God's called them to do. And for some people, it happens over and over and over and over again. Some people, life is full of a string of unfinished projects. Now, no one understands the obstacles and the challenges that you're going to face, that you are facing, or that you are going to face when God calls you to do something, until you're right in the middle of it. Sometimes you're never going to understand that. Whatever it is, whether it's in your family, it's in your job, it's in your relationships, your neighborhood, whatever it is, no one understood it better than the Apostle Paul. And Paul's call by God was to take the gospel to the Gentiles, and that's people that were not Jews. As a matter of fact, we are sitting here today because of God's call on the Apostle Paul's life. Because the call on his life was to take the gospel to the non-Jewish people and to tell them about Christ. So the reason that we are here is because of the calling that God placed upon the Apostle Paul. And it was a huge change of the world event. But living out that calling was not always easy. And he faced all kinds of obstacles and problems. In fact, in 2 Corinthians, Paul sort of gives a summary of, and I don't think this is everything that he went through, but this is some of the stuff that he had to endure to complete the mission that God had placed in his life. And it's in 2 Corinthians chapter 11. It's going to be on the monitor, starting at verse 24. He said, 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I've been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false believers. I have labored and toiled and have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst, and have often gone without food. I've been cold and naked. Besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all the churches. If nothing else, by you hearing this, ought to make you feel better about your life. If you're like me sometimes and you come in and you have a poor, pitiful me party going on, you can read this about the Apostle Paul and you're like, cable being now is not that big a deal. I think I'll live. So this at least ought to make you feel a little bit better. Paul faced all kinds of obstacles, and yet he never abandoned the call that God put in his life. He never left the passion for his call. He never turned his back on the call, and his life never becomes this string of unfinished projects. He kept focused on what God placed before him. And I think that he says something here, and we're going to look at here in just a second, as he nears the end of his life, and something that he says, and I think it's something that all of us would like to be able to say as we kind of get near the end of our lives and we look back. And it's in 2 Timothy chapter 4, and it says this: I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now, we have to ask, what is the key to Paul being able to face all these obstacles and all these challenges and not become so discouraged that he sort of loses the passion for what God has called him to do? To where he would turn his back on what God called him to do and to give up on everything. Let me point out 2 things real fast. The first one is this: the fact of the depth of love that Paul has for those that God has called him to serve, which would be his circle of influence. We've been talking about that for a couple of weeks. One of the things that allows Paul to not lose his passion is because of the depth of the love that he has for the people that God called him to minister to. Now, some of you might be saying, oh, this is first century people. They were easy to love. They don't know my Uncle Marty. I can't love him. They don't know my next door neighbor, Mildred. I can't stand her. She's nosy. That's not true, because these are, I guess, what you would call these people. These were not easy, lovable people. In fact, the people in Corinth, the people that he's writing the letter to, they were especially hard to love. There were an enormous amount of them that questioned Paul on every decision that he made. Every decision based upon his ministry. They told him he was a terrible pastor. They told him that he was a poor communicator. They questioned him on his motives of why he's doing all this stuff, on his ministry. And there's an amazing verse that it reveals Paul's love for this group of people. And you can find it in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. It says this. And you have to notice how he starts out here. He's like, now, I'm ready to visit you for the 3rd time, and I will not be a burden on you. And the reason that he said that is because he's already been there twice. Both times he's been there, they said, you're such a pain. You're a burden on us. So he says that. He said, I'm not going to be a burden on you. Because what I want is not your possessions, but you. Well, what else did they accuse him of? They accused him of his motive, and they said, all that you want from us is our money. So right off the bat, he's clearing this up. He says, so I will very gladly spend for you everything I have and expend myself as well. If I love you more, will you love me less? Here's a group of people that Paul's already made 2 very lengthy trips to visit to share the gospel. And in return, they've accused him of being a burden and just wanting the money. And they had said, you're not a very good speaker, you're not a very good communicator, you're not a very good pastor, you're greedy, you're a burden to us. I got to tell you, if I was Paul, I'm probably thinking that I'm not going to go back. I'm done. I mean, I can kind of see him, kind of talking to God, and he's saying, God, I know that this is something that I sense that you were calling me, and I sense this was what you wanted me to do in my life, but facing all these obstacles and challenges, I'm not sure about this, and I think that I'm just going to kind of pack up and head on to the next project that you give me. But Paul doesn't do that. He keeps coming back. He didn't say, God, I think you might have missed this one. I think you misjudged these people. This doesn't feel right. Paul does not do that. Why? Because his ultimate motivation is for him not to succeed. His motivation is not to succeed. He's not living out God's calling in the pursuit of achievement or accomplishment. He is motivated by God's deep love for him, which in turn gives him a deep love for these people. There is a saying, you've heard me say it many times. You've heard probably other pastors say this as well, or anyone in ministry. Matter of fact, some of you guys could probably finish for me. Ministry would be wonderful if it was not for the people. Think about that. Ministry would be wonderful if it wasn't for the people. But when you really think about it, ministry wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the people. Someone said this the other day about something. It may have been Jill. I forgot what it was about. But basically, it was nothing that is worth anything is ever easy. Nothing that is worth fighting for is ever easy. So here's Paul. He's motivated by God's love for him. Therefore, he's motivated for his deep love for these people and his circle of influence. And the first question that we have to ask when we sense that God is calling us to do something in this. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not talking about when God's calling you specifically into just some kind of work at church or starting a Sunday school class or whatever the case. I'm talking about your life. Your life. I remember when I first received Christ when I was 18 years old, I had no idea that my life was supposed to change the way that God changed me. Matter of fact, I didn't even realize it. So people were saying, you're different. I'm like, no, I'm the same me. But I wasn't. So there was a calling in my life in that very moment that my life was to change. So we have to ask this question. Why am I doing this? What's my motive? Am I doing it to prove my worth, doing it to prove my value, or just kind of, make a mark, to be successful at something, or whatever it is? Or am I doing this for the love of the people that God surrounded me with? There's a lot of folks on career paths today, and it's been a long time since they've asked that question of, what am I doing this for? Regardless of what career that you're in. Listen, life is precious. Time is precious. It's one of the most precious commodities that we have. So we have to ask the question, regardless of where you are in life, of why are you doing what you're doing? I love people that have businesses that make their business their ministry. That's exciting. To make your business or your occupation your ministry. To be a light to people that are around you, that are in that sphere of influence, so they can see Christ in your life. Let me tell you, and I've said this before too, and I always have to clarify myself before I say this. I have nothing, absolutely nothing against Christian schools at all. I think they're wonderful. But let me tell you, our Christian students in our public schools are the voice and the hands and the feet of Jesus Christ. We don't necessarily, let me turn this around. In the hallways of our Christian schools, there's some kids in there as lost as the day is long. Okay? We need Christian pupils, Christian students in our public schools to be Jesus Christ. kind of irks me if someone makes a statement something like, well, my little Lucy, she's a Christian, so we put her in a Christian school. When you become a believer, you're not supposed to exile yourself from the world. You're supposed to be in the middle of with them, fighting so they can see Christ through who you are and what he's done in your life. That's the calling that we each have. I don't care where you work at. I don't care what it is that you do, that we're supposed to be. And ask the question, why am I doing this? And if the question is anything other than because I love the people around me, then you might need to reconsider why you're doing it. Anything that you do, anywhere that you work, if you're called from God to that place, there's a purpose, and there's a meaning, there's a reason for you to be there. And the second thing that I believe allowed Paul to overcome all these challenges that he faced in life and not lose his passion and not abandon his call was this. He fully embraced the spiritual dimension surrounding all these challenges. There's a fairly familiar passage in Ephesians 6, and when I say Ephesians 6, some of you guys immediately know what it is. And it's kind of funny because some churches refer to this passage all the time. And then other churches, they avoid it at all cost because it makes some people a little bit uncomfortable. But in Ephesians 6, Paul is basically, he's writing to the Ephesians, and he's talking about the spiritual dimension behind the problems and the challenges that we face or are going to face, and about the ones that they're going to go through. And listen, the obstacles that you and I are facing or are going to face, they have a spiritual dimension about them, around them. There's more to problems that we don't see. In fact, he said that there's someone behind all these struggles, and that someone is the devil. Which brings us to the point of why people are nervous to talk about this, because some people are just really nervous to talk about the devil or Satan or Beelzebub or whatever you want to refer to him as, the enemy or whatever. And I get it, because we tend to get one of two things wrong when we talk about Satan. One, we either talk about him way too much, and Satan is hiding behind every bush and every rock and every corner. And we're kind of like Flip Wilson, the devil made me do it back in the olden days. We blame everything on Satan. Or two, we simply don't talk about him enough because we have in our mind that the only thing that is really real are the things that we see, and we don't understand that there's a force behind other things, of a spiritual challenge, of a spiritual realm. And that's why we're going to look at this. I mean, we sometimes get to places as followers of Christ, and we function like we're functioning atheists. And we look at this, and we act like all the challenges that we're dealing with are no more than what we see on the surface. And we don't acknowledge there's something much better. And Paul did a really good job of balancing this out. And he does not primarily focus on the devil. He talks about Christ and God and the Holy Spirit so much more in this. But neither does he ignore the fact that there's a spiritual dimension behind the things that happen in our life. Ephesians 6, chapter 11. If you want to turn there, you can. If you'd rather use your translation, but it's also up on the monitor as well. And we're going to start at Ephesians 6, chapter 6, verse 11. It said to put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Paul is saying that if you are a follower of Jesus Christ, you need to realize that there's a battle that is absolutely going on in your life. And it is not a battle against the enemy that you think. He's saying that there is a battle, but it's not against the people that frustrates you, or it's not against the people that's hard to love or you don't like, or those that you have no patience with. It's not even a battle against those that say things about you or against you or do things to you. sometimes we think it's a battle against them, and we turn those folks into our enemies. He says that you are in a battle, but it is not with those that you think the battle is with. He's saying that the battle is with the powers of hell itself, and with the spiritual forces of evil, against the powers of this dark world, against not what is seen, but what is not seen. That's what we really struggle against. Then he says, that is why we need to put on the full armor of God. And then he tells us what that armor is. He says this. He says, stand firm then, with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to all this, take up the shield with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. And pray in the Spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests. With this in mind, be alert and always keep on praying for all the Lord's people. Now, we don't have time today to look at every single piece of armor here. We could take each piece of armor and spend an entire message on that piece. So what I want you to do is this. I want you to kind of chunk this all together as one big piece, this suit, and as a whole. And I want to look at a couple of things. And the first thing is to look at the verb that is used to describe putting on this armor. It refers to a past action, something that's already been completed. In fact, the Greek, it actually says this: having been buckled with the belt of truth, having already taken up the shield of faith, or having taken the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit. In other words, Paul is saying this. This is stuff that you already have. Okay? And Paul's trying to make these people understand this is something that you already have. And it's something that you should already have on before the battle breaks out. I think Cody's here. He'll be a good example of this, serving a couple of tours, or anyone that was in the military. Is it better to be suited up for battle before you get to the battle, or wait till the battle starts and then start to get prepared for it? Kind of an obvious question. When the arrows are falling out of the arrow on top of you, it's kind of too late when you look up and say, oh, doggone, I should have put my armor on. By that point, it's too late. And Paul is saying to these people, folks, you already have this stuff. You already have the helmet of salvation. You already have the breastplate of righteousness. You already have the shield and the sword and all this stuff. He's saying, use it. Don't wait till the arrows are coming down and then you decide, okay, I better get dressed because the bullet's been fired. Listen, whenever I talk about being in the middle of a storm or being in the middle of a battle or whatever, it's kind of like two different congregations that you're talking to. Because on one, you're talking to people that are right in the middle of a storm in their life. And they're sitting there thinking, man, yeah, this is me. This is where I'm at in my life right now. Or you're talking to another congregation, and they're like, man, I hear you. I know somebody that needs to hear this message. We all need to hear this message. Ready yourself. Out of all those things, actually, I think I put a slide up. Can you go ahead and go to the next one there? And I want you to kind of look at those and see how many of those are an offensive weapon. You got the shield, it's to block. You got the helmet, it's to block anything in your head. You got the breastplate, you got the belt of righteousness. That's to hold your britches up for one thing, okay? And that's also to make sure that all the armor stays together. And you had the shoes of readiness, and you had the sword of the Spirit. You have one offensive weapon. That's the sword. That's the Word of God. There is nothing else that you need in your life to prepare you for the difficulties and the challenges that you're going to face in your walk. You have it. You have it. And it's, as we get on down through here and we look at Paul talking to these people, And he's saying, guys, you've already got this stuff, and it's all here. Just kind of use it. Now, hopefully you're not one who is in a continuous battle about something all the time. But when you're in a season where everything is going good and you don't have any problems, we're tempted during these seasons to just kind of coast along spiritually. Everything's going good. Nothing's out of the ordinary. And then our prayer life starts to dwindle. Our reliance upon God and our dependence upon God kind of starts to dwindle. And everything's kind of coasting along real good, but we get further and further and further away from these things right here. And the only time that we read God is when we come here on Sunday morning because it's up on the screen, and that's good enough to carry me over for another week, and then I'll come back and I'll get rejuvenated again. Listen. Who am I looking for? Trish. She's not going to let me say this. Sorry. I hate to go to the dentist. I hate it. And let me tell you why. When I was a child, we had a dentist. He's long gone now. But he had fingers about that big. And when I looked up and his fingers would come in my mouth, it was like seeing a billy club coming down. I'm like, how them big old fingers going to fit in this little bitty boy's mouth? And he didn't care. And he would never suction the water out. And it was like, I'm about to drown. And I hate, for years, I hated going to the dentist. Now, here's what I would do. I'm sure you see this all the time. When I had a problem, guess what I would do? I would go to the dentist. And they would pull the tooth or fill the cavity or do a root canal or whatever. But never would I go to kind of get periodically checked up and teeth cleaned and all this stuff because I was scared to death of the dentist. I hated the dentist. I don't want to stand here and feel like I'm by myself. Is anybody with me just don't like going to the dentist? Raise your hand. Thank you. So Trish, you can look at her looking around. Look at her. Yeah. But then finally, I had this one dentist I went to, and I skipped around 2 or 3. Because I would get embarrassed. So I went to this one guy, and I would go to him every now and then. And finally, the last time I went to him, this was the last time I went to him, he said, so what's wrong? I'm like, what do you mean? He said, well, you wouldn't be here if nothing was wrong. I'm like, yeah, you're right. So I stopped going in, and kind of like, okay, I got caught. But I finally found a dentist I really liked. And for the first time, I'm 34 years old. And for the first time, okay, I'm 53 years old. She's like, really? It don't age well. For the first time in all my 53 years of life, first time ever, I went and had a teeth cleaned about 2 months ago. And I was like, oh, this ain't too bad. Cause I found a dentist I really like. He's very good, and it's come a long way, I'm sure. But we're kind of like that with our spiritual life. When we're in trouble, we go to our knees and we pray. And we ask God, I'm in this situation, can you get me out? And sometimes I feel like God's looking at us going, okay, what's wrong? Well, I know you wouldn't be here if something was wrong. Why are you here? We all know that's true. Been there and done that. Paul is saying to these people, he's saying, you already have all this stuff. Here's what you need to do. You simply just need to put it on. But we're just coasting along, and then something hits us, and some kind of relationship problem or work problem or financial problem, and we start to scramble to get our armor on, and often it's too late, and we find ourselves in the middle of a battle, and we get overwhelmed by what's going on, and we just kind of lose our way and lose our focus because we waited too late, and the arrows have already been shot out of the bow, and they're coming at us, and we're watching them, and we're like, oh my goodness, I got to put this stuff on. Listen, the armoring of your soul takes time. It's not quick. So Paul says to put on your armor before the battle begins. Here's the second thing as I close. I want you to notice. Paul's writing to this group of people who are already Christians. Let's keep that in mind. So when he says to put on the belt of truth and the breastplate of righteousness and so on, and he's telling them to put on things that they already possess because they're already Christians. They have the truth, they have the righteousness, the salvation, the gospel, and so forth, so on. If you are a follower of Christ, you already have all these things. So if you already have all these things, then why is he telling them that they need to put these things on? Paul is reminding them of something profound, and we often forget it. He's saying, I want you to use what you already possess. What do we have that we just don't use it? We just like put it in the closet, well, I'll use it when I need it. Sometimes we play with our faith kind of like we get out a free jail card sometimes. I'm going to hold on to this until I really need it. Christ only had to die for us once. He don't have to do it again. So that get out of free jail card, that's we're able to use that. But here's the thing. We want to kind of do things our own way until we really need God to step in and take control. There are some things that you already have that became yours when you became a follower of Christ. They're in your possession, but we forget to put them on. You already have what you need to overcome adversity, overcome trials, to get through difficult situations. You just need to put it on. There's a story in Luke 8 where Jesus and his disciples, you guys know this story very well, they're in a boat in the Sea of Galilee, and the storm comes up, and the disciples are freaking out, and all these waves are going on. Jesus is sitting in the back of this boat asleep, and basically they're like, Jesus, if you really love us, you're going to calm these waves down. He stands up, and he says, calm. And the waves die down. He calms the storm. He calms the sea. And then what's interesting is the next thing that he does. After he calms the storm and the seas, he turns around, he turns his attention to his disciples. And after he's already pretty much rebuked the storm, he begins to rebuke them. And it's in a part of Luke 8:25. He turns to them and he's like, where is your faith? And I can hear him right now. And I can hear like a Thomas or whoever, like, I was really scared it was Peter. Peter was one that's freaking out. We love to play the blame game. We do. I mean, we love to say, well, and I do it all the time. With when I'm playing with Brenner or Jill or whatever, and me and Brenner kind of get carried away, and guess what? The first thing that happens, and once again, I'm 53, I think. Well, I'm like, well, she started it. I did not. Daddy started it. You hit me first. Oh my gosh. We love to play the blame game. So Jesus turns around to these guys and he's like, where is your faith? And I want you to notice, he doesn't question if they have faith. He doesn't not tell them that they need more faith. He's asking them in the middle of a storm, where is your faith? He's saying, you have all the faith that you need to deal with this, so why are you dealing with it like a person that has no faith? Act like you're a believer. Act like you're a follower. Act like you're one of my children. Why are you worried? Why do you have despair? Why are you acting like a person that has no faith? You have faith. So use it. And sometimes we don't know this until we're kind of reminded of this. And that's the purpose of this message this morning, is to remind you guys that you are equipped for any battle that you're going to encounter along your walk. I read an interesting story about a sub-lieutenant in World War II in 1944. And he was Japanese. I would tell you his name, but I can't pronounce it. But he was of the Imperial Japanese Army. And he was ordered to stay on the Libang Island in the Philippines and kind of hold it and kind of defend it. So he was left there on this island to defend this island and hold it for the glory of the Imperator. So he did this. And the following year, the Allies bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and not long after that, if you know anything about history, not long after that, the war ended. Well, unfortunately, no one told this guy the war was over. And the next year, he was still fighting and defending this island. And the next year went on, and he was still defending this island. For 29 years, this guy fought on this island after World War II was over. He was totally unaware that the war was long gone. Even when the police came and searched through the jungle using megaphones to ask him to surrender and stop shooting the locals. He was shooting local people. He thought the war was still going on. And even after they came and with megaphones and telling the war was over, he still wouldn't stop. And he didn't stop until 1974 when they located his commanding officer, brought him to the island, and that guy had to tell him the war's over. Let me remind you of something. The war is over and Satan has been defeated. Okay? Never forget that. That war is over. If you've read the beginning of the book, make sure you read the end of the book because it ends well for us. Satan has been defeated. And in that defeat, when Christ rose from the grave, we were equipped to walk through any battle that this world throws on us. Ask the former addict that's now a believer in Christ. Ask the cancer survivor that God's pulled through. Ask someone that's endured a divorce or relationship problem, but yet they've held firm and looked straight at the prize of the head and said, you know what? This isn't about this. This is about this. Ask these people. You have this armor that Paul talks about, and he looks at it and he says, use what God's already given you. And we just don't use what God gives us sometimes, because sometimes we're afraid to get out of the foxhole. We'd rather stay in the foxhole and just kind of hide and wait for the war to pass over. Sometimes it gets ugly in this world. If you're a teacher, it's very difficult to be an outspoken believer in Christ. And in some schools, not all schools, in some schools. At your place of business, sometimes it's very difficult. We're seeing it all the time. I mean, goodness, and I'm not going to get into this. This is a whole another Sunday and 2 Sundays and 3 Sundays. Here, what are we fighting about? What kind of bathrooms can we use? Seriously? Let me tell you, folks. I'm by no means a prophet, but I'm here to tell you this. We as in America, have totally redesigned the gospel the way that we want it. And that's scary, and that's dangerous. But let me remind you of this. When you stand before Christ as a believer in Christ, you stand before him alone. I don't have to answer for you. You don't have to answer for me. What you do in your life as a believer and a follower of Jesus Christ is crucial, not only in this world, but on the other side of heaven as well. Amen? I'm going to ask you to bow your head as we close here. And